The time has come, folks. We are on our last day of Pride. But, like a lot of us queers joyfully say, just because the month is over doesn't mean we stop being gay. So I will continue to spread all of the queer joy that is in the various hobbies that I love, especially and ultimately including Magic the Gathering. So you know that I've been doing this delightful series, Pride in the Multiverse, where I kind of highlight the queer characters of Magic. I've talked about the big couple of the hour, Nissa and Chandra. I've talked about trans and non-binary characters. I talked about the sapphic characters. And now today I'm going to be spotlighting the queer masculine characters in Magic. The men who identify as male and love other men or have loved other men or love multiple genders. That is all part of the queer spectrum and all part of the wonderful enchantment that is being queer. So let's start our little queer planeswalking journey, shall we? We will be going on our first stop, similarly to the Sapphic episode in which I deigned to talk specifically about Ovia, because Ovia kind of was a good representation of an older queer character who had a very positive impact. I want to start with truly the first queer masculine representation in Magic the Gathering, which was ultimately a couple. Before I do that, I would like to kind of sprinkle in the little preface here. Per my other videos, I said it then, it is certainly very needed to be said here. Magic, as a game that is just over 30 years old, will have portions of it that you can very much tell the writing is of its time. So I will obviously point that out as I'm going through and spotlighting these characters. You're going to have like old tropes of, making the villainous characters more queer or villainous seeming characters more queer. The queer dies for a cis straight person thing. That's just something that is part of the process of getting queer representation in honestly any form of popular media culture, especially in gaming. So that's just heads up, preface. Wanted to say that to do my due diligence because that's going to become relevant right now for our first characters. In our queer planeswalking journey to find these characters that we will be spotlighting this episode, we are going to start on the plane of Theros. Theros is a plane that is inspired greatly by ancient Greece and the Grecian pantheon and various gods. You would think that there would be more queer characters here because it's based on Grecian history, and Lord knows the Grecians were really, really queer. However, be that as it may, we don't have too many queers in Theros mythology yet. But our first characters certainly made a very big impact. If you've been playing Magic for a long time and you're very aware of the various storylines of different characters in Magic, or you're a queer person that's been playing Magic, I'm sure you're very aware of who I'm going to be bringing up. Our first couple, rather than character, is actually going to be Kynaios and Tiro of Meletis, also known as, lovingly, the gay statues. Kynaios and Tiro's story takes place before the Mending era. Think of the Mending era as like the modern age of Magic the Gathering. So their storyline takes place hundreds of years ago in the past of Theros. Kind of similar to how Alesha's story takes place in the past of Tarkir. So these two found one another from being great warriors each in their own right and realized that they had the connection and a lot of interests, one of which was the love of freedom and self-expression. And through this, these two great warriors fell in love. However, while they were living in Meletis, they were living under the immortal rule of a tyrannical emperor, Agnamakos. Kynaios and Tiro inspired the people of Meletis to stand up, to fight for what they wanted in life, and to buck against the rule of this so-called immortal being. And it is said in legend of Theros that they were given the support to be able to do that by the goddess Aphara. With the blessing of this goddess, Kynaios and Tiro were able to rise their allies in Meletis and push back against Agnomachos. And in doing so, freed Meletis of his very selfish ruling and gave the people a chance to truly rise up into the society that they wished to be. And with a new free society, it was then voted and decided upon that Kynaios and Tiro would become the guardians of Meletis. They would be the rulers, but rather than seeing themselves as rulers, considering what they had just fought against, they considered themselves more as the guardians. And their love helped them rule fairly and justly in a way for everyone to feel that they could be fulfilled in their own interests and passions, while each having their own individual freedom in this new society. And that's a beautiful, wonderful story, right? It's fantastic. However, here's where the but happens. So we see that this happens in the history of Theros, and their deeds are then thanked by them not only becoming the rulers here in the new society of Meletis, they have statues erected in their honors. That's kind of a guiding point to lead people to Theros. It's very cool. It was, in fact, the first card that they were on together was the Guardians of Meletis, their statues. The history of Theros is similar to ours in that when you have a great love that is clearly something that was very important to two individuals in their time, through the ages of time and history and washing upon their story, that portion of their story gets lost. The fact that they were lovers is effectively erased by the sands of time. They were great warriors, and then it is that stated that they were feuding lords, and that's why they had their statues together, that makes sense. However, they were buried together nonetheless. So similar again to our history, that we can have two people be very important to each other in their time and age, and then when they die, they choose to be buried together, but we remember them as great friends. The other thing that was the issue here is, like I said, their first card together was the Guardians of Meletis in 2015. And that was it. Everyone kind of saw them and joked that they were the gay statues. And that's just how they were. They were known as the gay statues. And then in 2016, we then circle back and then we get Kynaios and Tiro of Meletis, which is great. It's fantastic that we, at the very least, circled back and we got to see them on a card together, being delightful and amazing and great warriors. You truly love to see love as a battlefield. And here they are, a true symbol of that. And actually, while the gay statues were a symbol of pride to the people of Meletis and to the gay men in question, across the water on the other city, imagine that this is like Metropolis and then Gotham. In Gotham, there was a straight couple, Anax and Seamead, that were truly the heterosexuals who hated that they had gay neighbors that were prospering. So they would see the gay statues and then just truly shake their fists at it and be like, how dare they be prosperous? I still give that an A+. From the lovely Grecian-inspired plains of Theros, we are going to planeswalk to another plane that truly should be queerer. We, of course, are heading to the metropolis of Ravnica. Ravnica is a very huge plane that is kind of similar to New Capenna in a way, where in New Capenna, the plane is run by the different gang lords and the 5 different gangs on New Capenna. Ravnica is overseen by the guilds of the Ravnican space, and these guilds all come together to make greater decisions for the greater Ravnican people. And here we are going to be talking about our first planeswalker on the list. Of course, y'all know him. Y'all love him. He can be very, very messy. Of course, we're talking about Zarek, a storm mage that is able to use magic to obviously create and control storms and electricity. So he often wears kind of like an electromagnet conductor on his back with gauntlets that kind of store up power so that he can unleash them when he wants. Think maybe gayer Bakugo from My Hero Academia, but instead of explosions, it's electricity, and you're on the right track. With Ral being a planeswalker, he has a lot of information and a lot of story and a lot of things that have hinged on him in particular. So for this video, again, I am doing broad stroke swipes here to give you an idea of the character. So with that in mind, Ral. Ral is a storm mage. He was known in his youth as the rain mage and got picked on for it, which honestly is probably why he grew up to be kind of the self-assured punk that he is. Growing up relatively poor, Ral was from a smaller district in Ravnica, and after the loss of his mother, and then he pulled himself away from his father that was truly a terrible influence, he got himself to the 10th district, and he ended up finding jobs that he could use his abilities for, because everyone tended to make fun of him, thinking that, oh, he can just produce rain. So he kind of grew understanding and reading the philosophies and principles of storm magic that Niv Mizzet wrote. It was actually very fascinating because while he was looking at the writings of Niv Mizzet for understanding and accumulating his growth and grasp on his own magic, he never saw him as someone to model himself after or a mentor in a way. He just kind of saw Niv Mizzet as like a rival, a stepping stone. Honestly, the Bakugo allegory is kind of fitting even more here. While working for Nicol Bolas, he ended up being kind of an enforcer for him on Ravnica, and on one of his missions, he was trying to rough up a kid, and the kid ended up getting the jump on him, and he ended up stabbing Ral, and the shock of being stabbed is actually what made Ral spark, and he planeswalked away from Ravnica. On this new plane, taking the new opportunity that he had to literally rewrite his story, he kind of made a new life for himself. He found an apprenticeship with somebody on this plane that did electric magic and started learning under this person, found a lover. This is his second lover, by the way. He had another lover while he was being a enforcer for Nicol Bolas. So he found a second lover, and he and his lover were co-apprentices under this person, and eventually they then both learn as much as they can from this person and then betray this person to rob him, and then they kind of start accumulating wealth to have their own hoard. In a way, it's kind of very cool thinking that Ral saw Niv Mizzet not as a mentor or someone of an equal, but someone of a rivalship. And you got to think of a personality that has that thought process to think that my rival is another dragon would in fact perhaps have dragon-like tendencies. So Ral on this new plane begins to accumulate his own hoard. While he did love this other man that he was with, who also helped him rob his now former mentor on this unidentified plane, Ral eventually does also betray that man and accumulates even more wealth, taking off with both of their shares and having his own treasure cruise in a way. It isn't until Nicol Bolas eventually shows up on this plane that Ral decides he's done. He's going to peace out and he's going to head back to Ravnica. Upon his return to Ravnica, Ral actually becomes a head researcher for the Izzet. Having already researched himself Niv Missed's writings, decided that this was the guild that he felt most tied to, most akin to. So he kind of threw himself in with them, and through doing the research that he was doing, he ends up helping plot out ley lines of magic through Ravnica. And that is partially how Ral starts running into the Gatewatch, is that he's supposed to be finding Jace for Niv Mizzet when Jace is on Ravnica. Through all of this comic book shenanigans of trying to hunt down Jace and doing a bunch of other different things, Ral begins having run-ins with the Gatewatch and eventually starts kind of finding his own footing with them, both as a rival and as kind of a frenemy. It is in climbing the rungs to be able to get higher in the Izzet that Ral ends up in a secret relationship with somebody that the order of his guild will not be very impressed by. Of course, I'm talking about Tomik Vrona. Tomik, of course, being a law and security mage of the Orzhov Guild, also in Ravnica. So, obviously, Ral's guildmates would not be appreciative of the fact that he is dating, also secretly sharing an apartment with, somebody from a rival guild. Because, of course, Tomik is part of the Orzhov being more strict and by-the-book legal goth types, the white-black of Ravnica. And in fact, Tomik himself, while he is listed as a law and security mage, he is effectively a lawyer who has very good protective barrier skills. And it is, in fact, his abilities, while powerful as they are, and not as storied as Ral's because he is not a planeswalker, he still has a lot of ties to a lot of very important characters. In current canon, he is the acting guild leader for the Orzhov. It's actually, in fact, Tomik's understanding of law and the magic that binds individuals to their guild contracts that he is able to be helpful to Kaya, but also in a way be torn between two different mistresses. So he was initially the right hand for Teysa Karlov. Teysa was in the running to be guild leader for the Orzhov. And then when Kaya showed up, Kaya also became a possible prospect for being the guild leader. And then eventually did get the ability to become guild leader. However, as a planeswalker, while she was tied to her responsibilities on Ravnica, Kaya still ultimately had things that would take her off world. She would have to planeswalk to go do different things, both that she wanted and also stuff that she felt that she had to do. And it was Tomik's help that allowed her to find a loophole in the legal magical binding spell that does end up tying people to their guild responsibilities, especially as a guild leader. And it's through these legal loopholes that Tomik is able to help her figure out a way to get out and ultimately tie her abilities as guild leader and assign them over to him as acting guild leader. So now Tomik is the acting guild leader for the Orzhov, while Kaya is able to be free to planeswalk and eventually join the Gatewatch to help and interfere on issues that are happening on various planes. It is after all of this that it comes out that Tomik and Ral are dating while they were planning individually as part of their respective guilds a giant meeting for all of the guilds. There is a lot of strife that comes of this, though through that, Ral and Tomik are able to come together and see their way through this and eventually get married. We see that their wedding is actually depicted on the card Savor the Moment from the Pride Across the Multiverse Secret Lair that came out in 2022. Through a ton of messy trials and tribulations that they each individually have, Ral and Tomik are able to come together and be both very important to themselves and to each other and to Ravnica as a whole, but also as representation for a happily married couple in Magic the Gathering that is queer. We don't have enough of that. Hopefully we will get more in the future. We leave the metropolis of Ravnica to planeswalk to our next queer destination. Honestly, one of the places that I feel is in the running for queerest plane in Magic the Gathering. Of course, the delightfully spooky and ever-charming Innistrad. Not a planeswalker on this list, but still powerful, important, and honestly pretty rad. We are talking about Vadrik, Astral Archmage. Vadrik hails from the town of Nephalia, one of the smaller residencies in Innistrad. He, while being a 40-something-year-old mage, has been able to track and begin to understand what the moon and its phases can do for the various magics of Innistrad. And the knowledge of that is able to give people the ability to understand and protect themselves from werewolves. And also he has fought an Eldrazi during the attacks that Innistrad went through in that whole ordeal. And Eldrazi, of course, being a high eldritch being that on Innistrad ended up being tied and eventually locked on the moon, thanks to the Gatewatch. While he does do this and has given people this knowledge to protect themselves from werewolves, he himself is not intrinsically opposed to werewolves. He is in fact friends with Arlen Cord, planeswalker, werewolf, hot older mommy. And then, of course, being on this list, Vadrik is a gay man, and while it's not too much of a big plot point, which is what we love to see queer representation that is not intrinsically beholden to stories having to be expressly only about being queer, Vadrik does have a husband who was initially from Lamholt. We don't see too much of Vadrik because while Vadrik is a cool character and pretty important, he doesn't have too much story to him, honestly. He's depicted on his card, of course, and he's also depicted on the Lunar Mystic card, in which it's very fun that Tamio is the flavor text for that, and she effectively says something like, it's wonderful and refreshing to see that they understand that the moon does more than just X, because Vadrik has expressly made it his life's goal and mission to study the moon. So Tamio giving you the heads up means you're A-okay and you're a good queer. A+ Vadrik. Honestly, Vadrik is one of those situations that, similar to what I've been saying, planeswalkers get all of the story and attention, which is fine because planeswalkers are kind of like our way as an audience to see the story. But it still would be nice to have a little bit more fleshing out of different characters who happen to be very interesting in their own right on their own planes, like Vadrik. So hopefully, whenever we return back to Innistrad, we'll see more of Vadrik and what he's up to. Shifting our attention and planeswalking away from delightful, queer, spooky Innistrad, we head to a plane that we have not touched upon yet in this series, and one that I am very, very excited for. We have talked lightly about it, but we have not specifically tied a queer character to it. So I'm very excited and also was very surprised about this while doing this research. We, of course, are going to the delightful fairy tale plane of Eldraine. We are talking about our second planeswalker on this list, Will Kenrith. Will is the twin brother of Rowan. Will and Rowan have a very intrinsically tied story, almost perhaps to a fault. Will often does not actually get a lot of the story focus. He's often playing second banana to Rowan, which is unfortunate because Will's kind of pretty cool. Being a ice mage, which is the reflection of his sister being a fire mage, they kind of go hand in hand to each other, each having their own ways of doing things. But Will, in and of himself, is a very interesting character because he and Rowan were very interestingly conceived into the world. Second verse, same as the first, like I've been stating, because Will is a planeswalker, we do know a lot more about him. We know that he and Rowan were created because of a witch entrapping their father and casting a spell on him to make him live with her, and when she ultimately got pregnant and had the twins, she killed them to be able to use their life essence for nefarious deeds of her own. I believe it was to grant herself immortal life. When this happened, their father, King Kenrith, came to his senses and ultimately slew the witch and returned back to his kingdom distraught over what had happened to his children and also to him. He did eventually return to his beloved Queen Linden, and Linden, being a warrior in her own right, had her own magic tied specifically to a sword, and she gave up her sword to be able to use its magic to bring the twins back to life, and in doing so took them in instantly and raised them as her own. And then the twins being raised with their father and their beloved stepmother, Queen Linden, also have siblings, Eric and Hazel. They were raised to be very knightly in a way. So Rowan is very impetuous and kind of goes on the attack, while Will kind of watches the abilities of another person and then makes very calculated attacks to try and get to the best outcome faster, having studied the people that he is fighting. This goes very importantly to his story, because while Rowan is very big, bombastic, and very impetuous and very attention grabbing, people tended to think that Will then was very chill and relaxed and was the easygoing one that anything could happen to. When in actuality, because Rowan took all of the attention, Will actually did whatever he wanted. He let things kind of like roll off his back and did whatever he wanted, learned different secrets slowly but surely. It's actually Will's ability to kind of step back and watch while things happen that actually helps him and his sister in the main storyline for Eldraine be able to get their father back from the planeswalker trickster Oko, who has kidnapped their father. So they are on a quest to go and find him. It's on this quest that Will is able to save Garruk from a curse that was bestowed upon him by Liliana. In trying to save Garruk, Will's bravery and persistence calls the Cauldron of Eternity. And the Cauldron of Eternity is this mythic item that is able to wash away great curses and ailments from an individual. And they do so, and they are able to cure Garruk of the curse that he has from the Chain Veil. And because of this, Garruk allies himself with the twins. When all is said and done, they're able to get their father back, and they are told by their mother Linden that they had a not great origin, and the shock of their origin is what ultimately gets them to spark, and they become planeswalkers. But what is very cool about them is that their spark is actually tied to one another, so they cannot planeswalk without the other. They are the first planeswalkers to have something honestly kind of cool like this. Planeswalking is pretty, I don't want to say old hat, but it is one thing, and it has always been one thing. So it has been pretty cool and pretty refreshing to have the twins have something so different about how they planeswalk. However, in this instance, it's not the greatest, because the shock of being told their story and what their origins are makes them spark, and they leave Eldraine. The king and queen left shocked by this new foundation for them, and Garruk pledges himself to the king and queen, stating that he will find the twins and protect them and keep them safe. Eventually, the twins do planeswalk to different places, ultimately heading to Strixhaven at the invitation of Kasmina. And it is on Strixhaven that the twins realize that not only did they have this very rocky start to their origin, they also have a lingering curse bestowed upon them. And it is ultimately while having to deal with the curse that Bill does end up losing his leg. And while he loses his leg, he is proficient enough in his magic and smart enough to use his magic combined with another tool, metal, to create himself a very lattice-inspired prosthetic. And so Will not only is a queer cool character, he also is a badass who makes himself a prosthetic, which is truly king behavior, which is also pretty important. So this is all well and good and fascinating, right? A fantastic description of a really cool character who is also a very cool representation of amputees. But like, he's queer, right? Yes, indeed, dear viewer, he is queer. So in the initial book for Throne of Eldraine, there is an excerpt that does heavily imply that Will is bisexual. Will feels an attraction for a female friend of his and for a male friend of his, both of which are in his traveling party. And, being torn between two attractive people, we've all been there, regardless if you're, bi or if you are just gay. So that has firmly put Will here on this delightful list of amazing queer characters. And that's really about what we know about his queerness. However, why I have sprinkled in all of this information and then told us the story of how we know that he is queer is because Will and Rowan are going to be very important in the next storyline set for Magic. We, of course, are talking about the Wilds of Eldraine. So we have seen in the aftermath of what has happened in March of the Machine, Will and Rowan did ultimately lose their sparks, like a lot of unnumbered planeswalkers, and they are now firmly locked on their plane. However, unlike other planeswalkers who have to deal with this truly disorienting disconnect from their magic, they have to deal with that and the fact that their parents have died. The king and queen for their kingdom in Eldraine are gone. And Will and Rowan were the next in line. With everything having just gone down on Eldraine and losing their parents, Will ultimately has a fracturing with his sister, and they each have different thoughts of what should be the next step for their kingdom. Rowan wanting to rule in complete power, and Will wanting to rule with effective order. He splits off with his sister and takes up his father's crown and declares himself the High King. And that is what we know going into this next set. I am very interested to see that, hopefully, with seeing this fracturing between the twins, that we will get to see more glimpses of who he is. Perhaps in the bid for high order, he wants to instantly have a spouse at his side to be able to rule effectively. So maybe we'll see a decree where he wants all of the eligible bachelors and ladies to show up, and he'll try and pick someone from that. Who knows? It's kind of picking at straws here, but honestly, that's kind of why I wanted to mention Will. Will is just an open canvas here, waiting for more swatches of color to be put upon it. And I think Wilds of Eldraine is going to give us that. While the twins are ultimately fighting and trying to figure out what the course correction is supposed to be and who's actually supposed to be ruling the kingdom, they also, unbeknownst to them, knownst to us, is that people are falling into a mysterious deep slumber, and they are eventually going to run across the path of Ashiok. So will the twins fall under Ashiok's spell? Will they also fall asleep? Will they have to deal with Ashiok giving them nightmares? I don't know, but I can only assume that Ashiok, being the delightful little being that they are, will likely, if that happens, pull at the strings of want and desire for Will, and we will hopefully see more of a, not necessarily an emphasis, but more description of Will as a bisexual man. Will trying to deal with the different things that are brought up in his nightmare from Ashiok is truly going to be interesting to see. But honestly, also why I wanted to put him on this list. It's very cool that he is a bisexual man. I hope we get to see more about that. And hopefully that he and Rowan come out on the other side okay at the end of Wilds of Eldraine. Next on this wonderful queer list, we have that can't be everybody, right? Okay. Really? That's everybody? Yeah, you heard that right. I read that right. That was all of the gay, masculine, queer characters in Magic the Gathering. Is it enough characters? I, for one, don't think so. I think that there should be more queer masculine characters. It's honestly it was very, very weird and very surprising to me, really sitting down and looking up characters to talk about, that there were ultimately not many. There were, on Ravnica, 2 more characters, but they weren't even expressly on Ravnica, and both of them ultimately were just there so that we can say that Ral had multiple partners before he married Tomik. So I can't in good faith actually list them, which is very weird. It's very disheartening to see. But I think it's goes back to the warning that I had at the top of the video, that the writing for a lot of these characters is product of when they came out. It is a product of their time. In a lot of popular media, it is easier and more digestible for a greater audience to see 2 women being together than it is for 2 men being together. Or, Lord forbid, that there be pansexual or bisexual representation. There's just something with the thought process of the greater society that seeing men being queer is just not something that's okay. It's not something that I can say is expressly what's happening here. I can only speak on my own experiences and watching and reading and playing different other popular media. That can be a symptom of a time period. I do certainly think that times are changing, and I would hope that in our future we see more queer masculine characters come to the forefront in Magic. That we see characters that we know be confirmed, like Will, actually be confirmed bisexual. I can only hope. But it's why I did this project, to be able to put a spotlight on who we have and to also point out that there's not that many and that hopefully in the future we get more. In rounding out this video and then in showing you the smaller number that we have of queer masculine characters, I do also want to bring up that there are characters in Magic the Gathering canon that fans do see as queer coded and feel a tie to based on their own storylines and how things are depicted for those characters. And fanon can be just as important as what is canonically given to us. And then ultimately when things from fanon become canon, of course it's even more powerful. But that doesn't mean that fanon has to become canon or that canon is not in and of itself powerful. It is just the product of people seeing their own life experiences depicted in how characters themselves have been written. And I think that there is something very important to be brought up about that. In talking about this, I do have to bring up the wonderful quote from the creator of My Life as a Teenage Robot, Rob Renzetti, that he states, "There is no intentional transgender subtext within his show, but that does not mean that the subtext isn't there. Art is open to the audience's interpretation. I'm pleased that Jenny's struggles resonate with some members of the transgender community." And I think this is the perfect take that creators should have when they find out that ultimately some of their characters are kind of adopted by people of the queer community for having storylines that are so similarly resonant with people's own life experiences. And it is because of that I will talk about a couple of these characters very quickly here. One character who we know was very loosely talked about to possibly being revealed as a queer character was actually a Johnny Goldmane. Johnny Goldmane, there wasn't anything in distinct cement stone written that this was going to be a thing. It was just something that a person who was on the Magic writing team at the time, is no longer with Wizards of the Coast, did state that there were toss-ups and possibilities for a Johnny to be queer, that ultimately, as we know, did not come to fruition. And I do know that a lot of queer men who I know were very sad about this and had wished that a Johnny had been put out as a queer character in Magic. And while I can appreciate that, and I am not a queer man, so I'm not going to tell a queer masculine individual to not have those feelings, I will state that I understand why it didn't happen. While we as queer individuals are still fighting for rights that we should have, at the time that this would have come out, we didn't have Ral. We didn't have Tomik. We didn't even really have Kynaios and Tiro. We had the gay statues. That was all that we had. And at that time, when people were trying to fight just for the bare minimum of gay marriage, or as I like to call it, marriage, and the different equality that that gives to people who are able to get married, something that was lauded at us as queer people was that if we wanted gay marriage, what was next? The right to marry animals? And while I am not throwing any shade at the furry community, I myself am a little baby budding furry. At that time, I don't know if a Johnny coming out as a queer masculine character would have done positive representation ultimately for the community. There would certainly have been people who would have been drawn to him, but there also would have been a lot of people who would have bucked against it and would have pointed at the fans of it, at Wizards as a whole, stating that they were proving exactly that theology, that that is what gay people wanted. Gay people wanted to marry animals. And so unfortunately, a Johnny was not made to be a queer masculine character. However, there are people who love that thought for a Johnny, and those people have every right to continue seeing a Johnny as a bear. And honestly, go off, y'all. Love that for you. Similarly, in a same vein but distinctly different, we have another very important character who, through a fanon interpretation, has really taken a lot of people's shared experiences and helped them kind of see the strength and heroism in overcoming those similar storylines in a way that is magical and fantastical and makes this person a hero, because time and time again, they struggle against their own life circumstances. I am, of course, talking about Jace Beleren. Jace has been embraced by so many queer individuals, specifically individuals who are trans and non-binary, for so many similarities that they see in Jace. And fanon does persist that people see Jace as a trans man. I actually was going to make a specific video talking about Jace's inherent queerness and how fanon sees that and can provide a lot of support to see Jace as a trans man. However, I was specifically going to make a video from an essay that does an amazing job going over Jace's origins, where Jace is from, the ties of Jace's abilities, Jace's storylines, specifically Jace on Ixalan and his ties to Vraska, and how all of those can be tied to the trans masculine experience. But in reading that essay, I realized that so much of that essay had so many deeply personal anecdotes from the writer that I, in good faith and good question, could not just make a video of it and talk about these different anecdotes, because I myself am not a trans individual. So I am actually going to be linking that essay down below in the doobly-doo. You can check it out. It is called Self-Made Man, Jace Beleren and Representation for Transgender Men in MTG. It is by SpaceBeleren, great trans guy swag, similar to Jace himself. And as we see in the Marshall Machine's side story, Jace do have that trans guy swag and does in fact know how to lay it down for a woman. And honestly, that makes sense. That makes sense. I can see trans guy Jace. So please go and follow that. Check out that article. It is amazing. I loved it so much. Amazing job, Bradley. Thank you for that. While not a queer masculine character, another two characters who can be seen as queer in the fanon. While one twin is bisexual, so too can the other. Rowan is also phenonically seen as a bisexual woman. specifically here on this card. While Will hit the books, Rowan hit everything else. Could that be in a physical altercation kind of way? And can that be in a physical altercation kind of way? I see as yes. So Rowan can be considered as a phenomenically queer character. And similarly, and importantly to my heart, so too can Arlen Cord from Innistrad, werewolf planeswalker mommy, as I love to know her as. Arlen was part of the Abyssinian Order. There's a lot of, I will not go into it deeply here, but there is a lot of indication of Arlen's backstory and how that ties to the Abyssinian religion that can herald very deeply to stories of women who were nuns in modern era and in older history that ultimately were queer individuals and really found a peace in the nun order because they were around other women. So there's a lot of parallels that can be read into looking into Arlen's history and Arlen herself being a queer individual. And in fact, even looking at the stories that we do have with Arlen, Arlen ends up being friends with or working with queer individuals. And we as queer individuals know queers of a feather flock together. And I think that that should hopefully be expanded upon. But that's the beauty of the enchantment that can be Fanon, is seeing the potential and your shared experiences in characters that you love and adore and feeling the beauty that is being represented by those characters in these fantastical and magical ways. And that, I feel, is the power of magic. Oh my God, that's it for this video series. Thank you guys so much for watching this. It has been a trip seeing everybody actually watching and commenting on my delightful queer little passion project. It was a lot having to produce, film and edit a video effectively weekly throughout the month of June. But honestly, I've learned so much and I really, really enjoyed the process. I hope you guys did too. And this is something that I want to continue. I do want to do stuff like this. I will be doing, perhaps not always magic related items, but I will be doing other things on this YouTube channel. Not weekly. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a break there, but I will be using this channel to make more video essays about things that I am passionate about. And of course, I will be talking more magic as time comes and more queer things as time comes, because that's a huge part of my story. And I want other people to see that that can be something that they are proud of within themselves in whatever they're interested in. I am here to help make geeky spaces more approachable for everyone, regardless of your sexual orientation, your gender, your ethnicity, your physical ability. Everyone is allowed to be a geek mosa or a geek moso or as geeky as you want to be. So I will see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Comment down below who you liked of these queer masculine characters. Were you as surprised about Will as I was? Please let me know down below and make sure to check out Radley's amazing article about trans guy Jace. It's phenomenal, and I will see you guys on another plane.